In 1985, my work has been inspired by Edward Thompson, and I may talk about him too much tonight. Because, in 1985, he looked back on his past as a radical social historian. And he looked back with a certain distance because he'd been out of the history business for a while, trying to bring about a peace movement. You know that peace sign? That was him. He said a certain breakthrough in British radical history, associated particularly at that point in the Marxist tradition, took place some 45 years ago. He apologized for using the military imagery. We are still exploiting the terrain that was opened up with that breakthrough. So he took the breakthrough that Marcus referred to, and he put it not in 1945, but he put it in the year 1940. He was 16 years old at the time. He was a schoolboy at a boarding school in Bristol that was the target of Nazi bombing. So in that summer, as the bombing began, the school children of the school were removed from Bristol, and he was sent to Leicestershire in the middle of England. Millions of children that summer and in that fall left their homes in this class-ridden society, workers in the slums of the cities, and moved into the countryside. And there was a mixture of the classes and of the people that had never happened before. And Edward, at the age of 16, his brother, already gone off to war, was part of that movement. England was a class society. 1/6 of the children did not have shoes in 1940. An upper-class boy or girl was on average 4 inches taller than someone from the working class. The vast majority of British people. Now, breakthroughs in that summer were happening all over the world. Virginia Woolf, you know, the great feminist, had 2 houses in Bloomsbury that were smashed to bits from the bombs. She was denied a place at the conference table or at the officers' mess as a woman. She found her place at the kitchen table. And she wrote, "Thinking is my fighting." That was her breakthrough in 1940. On the 11th of September 1940, she wrote in her diary, fearful of the invasion to come. Mary Inman in the United States had a breakthrough in the summer of 1940 when she proposed that those whose work is never done, that part of the human race who works 24 hours a day for love, not money, be paid. Mary Inman was her name. She advocated wages for housework. What a breakthrough. That same summer, 1940, C.L.R. James, the Trinidadian intellectual, sports writer, playwright, novelist, essayist, he said to the white ruling class across the Atlantic that history must be rewritten to show how, in the transition from feudalism to capitalism, that great labor was conducted by African Americans. What a breakthrough that was. And then, in the 1940s, as has been so often quoted in our time, Walter Benjamin tried to escape Europe by crossing the Pyrenees, escape from the fascist armies, the Blitzkrieg. And he handed in Marseille, in the Marseille underground, over to Hannah Arendt, his theses on history. And he said, history is a flower, and it must be brushed against the grain. Not even the dead are safe from the enemy. The now is shot through with messianic time, Benjamin said in 1940. I'm trying to build up the pressure of that year, 1940, to understand Edward's breakthrough. For me, he said, 1940 as a school student came from the work of Christopher Hill. His first brief study of 1640. I sat down at the age of 16 to write a sixth form history society, a paper on the Marxist interpretation of history and the English Civil War. And he relied on Christopher Hill's study of the English Civil War. A study that proposed that the Civil War be called the English Revolution. A study that showed that revolution was not a cheap politician's slogan, but it meant the living struggle of comrades to build a society based on communal ownership. Now this was not Stalinist history. This was not orthodox communist history. And no wonder. You remember 1940, or perhaps you've read, that at that time the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany, leaving communists who, until that time, took their direction very much from the Soviet Union on their own. And this freed Christopher Hill to begin thinking of the English Revolution, not in Soviet terms, but in English terms, if I may put it that way. And Donna Torr, the founder of the Communist Party History Group after the war, in 1940, had her breakthrough. When she wrote that millions of people who stood outside of history have become makers of history in India, in Africa, in Latin America. These are the breakthroughs of 1940, and in particular, this breakthrough in the communist tradition. Edward went off to war. In his knapsack, he carried one book. It's called the Handbook of Freedom. And its introduction has a beautiful rendition on the meaning of the word commons. After the war, Edward took this book with him when he went north to teach in adult education classes, and it led him to new sources and to researches of his own. So I think in a very definite and particular way we can see the making going right back through the making of the English working class, through the 50s, through the 40s, right into the summer of 1940. These are some of his breakthroughs. And the tags by which we know him today, his moralism, his belief in human agency, his belief, his way of cutting through academic BS, the multiculturalism that led, that version of multiculturalism that turned into gobbledygook of post-structural linguistic acrobatics observed by fewer and fewer. He cut through it all with a great knife of history, and he said, I speak of human experience.